Yo guys, I'm Niek from Producer School and welcome back to a brand new video. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make tech house like Cloonee. Cloonee is known for his hard-hitting and simple tech house tracks, and today I'm going to walk you through a Cloonee style project which sounds like this. I will discuss all the elements in this track, and I hope that you guys can learn some new tips and tricks that you can use in your own productions. For now, let's head straight into the video. So the first element that is actually also pretty much the main element that makes this track is the brass loop, and that sounds like this. This brass loop is from our new pack Devotion, which is a minimal and tech house sample pack. So if you want to check that out, go to the link in the description. It has plenty of these brass loops, such as the one in this project. I will now quickly show you how we made these kind of loops. So we wanted to recreate a real instrument, but we weren't able to actually record it. So we decided to use Kontakt. And Kontakt is a sampler plugin, which is, in my opinion, the best plugin if you want to create realistic instruments, such as this. You can also make like guitars or strings with it. It has a lot of options. We use the Sessions Horn Pro library, and you can choose out of like multiple kind of instruments, such as a trumpet or a saxophone. So let's just choose one. So for example, this trumpet that is included in this library sounds really great, and you can play around with it a little bit. Also, it's velocity sensitive, so play around with that to make it a bit more realistic. For example, a simple melody like this. It's really basic now, but you can also play around with these key switches right here, which changes up the sound. And you can also layer it to get a perfect brass loop. Eventually, with some layering and FX, you can get a loop like this. Then we have the bass. The bass is really simple, but it's a really important part of this track as well. And it sounds like this. So most of the time it just stays on the C sharp, but in the end it changes up just to add some variety. The sound is made in Serum. It consists out of two saw waves. One is pitched down 2 octaves and one is just on the standard settings. And if you just keep it on one voice of unison and play a saw in a low note with a filter on it, it will already sound like a tech house bass a lot. So that's why we added the MG Low 24 filter as well, set to around 200 Hz. And then next up there is some tube distortion, a multiband compressor, and some filtering once again. The distortion and the multiband compression just add these harmonics that you would miss if you don't add it, and it just makes the sound a bit more fat. So if I turn it off, not a huge difference because most of the harmonics that you add will be filtered out later. Otherwise it would sound way too harsh like this. It really doesn't sound nice. Just want to keep it clean by filtering out those messy high end. Now you basically have your bass already. For the post-processing, there's not much special as well. Just a duck in the higher area and a sidechain on it. I would recommend to do a pretty hard sidechain because later on I'm going to show you the kick, which is a pretty fat kick that takes up a lot of space. And you don't want this like really subby bass to clash with your kick. So make sure that you add quite some sidechain. In the project you can also hear some steps and synths. They are really subtle and there's not a lot of them. but it's this fill synth, which is a preset from the pack as well, made from saw waves with a LFO shaped like this, with the rate set to 1/8, and that's linked to the level of both oscillators and to the filter. And then there's some tape saturation and a reverb, and then you basically already have the sound, which is really easy, but it just adds a bit to the groove. Just some EQ with a low cut and a little cut in the high area, and then there's a tiny bit of reverb to make the sound a little bit bigger. And basically the last synth in this project is a little offbeat step, and it's a preset from Serum, but I won't dive too deep into it because it's basically also based on a step sample, which sounds like this. And then there are some wavetables to make it sound a bit more full. And there's also some filtering for the sound. Let's now move on to the most important part of the track, which are the drums. And when I solo the drums, it sounds like this in the first part of the drop. And in the second part of the drop, there are some more elements coming in. I will now go over all the elements of the drums, because it's a really important part of a tech house track. So first up, we have this kick, and you need a really big pumping kick that works well together with a sound kind of tech house bass. In this case, we used a kick from the Devotion pack, which sounds like this. As you can hear, it's a pretty fat kick, and that's something that you want in the style. There's a tiny bit of decapitator on this kick. It's a trick that you can use for these kind of kicks to just change the sound a little bit. You can play around with these styles here as well. It's a really great plugin by Sound Toys, but make sure you don't like overdo it, because then it can make your kick sound smaller instead of bigger because it crushes it so much. Then there's a layer of 3 claps. For this style, you really want like short and tight claps. What you can do for that is you can, for example, use the quick fade out function in FL Studio and make your claps much tighter. And these tight claps leave a lot of room for the other elements, such as the hi-hats that I will show you right now. For the hi-hats, there's an open hat, which sounds like this. Here as well, the quick fade out to make it a bit shorter instead of this. And then there's this loop, which sounds like this. On the loop, there are actually 2 transient processors with the release turned down. The first one completely, and then this one a little bit more. And what that does is it makes it much more tight. I already showed you guys this trick in the previous video. But if I turn it off, it will sound like this. And when it's on, it sounds like this. So much more tight, and these tight drums just sound really nice. Then at the end of every bar, there's a rim shot, which sounds like this. It's made in MIDI, because it's really easy to control the velocity right here. And as you can see, the last one is a bit off beat. And you can just simply like drag it around when you hold the Alt button and place it somewhere off beat. Or you can change the grid to, for example, use a triplet. And you can get really creative with that. Also, don't forget about the percussion. I like to layer multiple percussion in one pattern and use MIDI and let them like play alongside each other, which sounds like this. You can hear they are not that loud because you really want them to be in the back of your mix, but it just contributes to the groove a lot. Also for this, you can play around with the velocity. Then in the playlist, there's one more percussion. And with the elements I showed you already, you basically have a drop already that sounds like this. So to be honest, this style is not that complicated, but you just need to use a few really good elements that work well together. And you just need to keep it simple, don't overdo things. Just make sure that you have a few sounds that sound really nice together. And then you will have a like fat tech house Cloonee style drop already. In the second part of the drop, the brass loop comes in. As you can see, there's an automation that adds some sidechain because you don't want it to clash with your kick. So when the brass loop comes in the drop, there is sidechain added to it. You don't have to add that much sidechain, just a little bit is enough, because otherwise it will sound really unrealistic as well. In the second part of the drop, there are some closed heads, also in a MIDI pattern. As you can see, they are in a really groovy rhythm with some variety in velocity as well. And then there are 2 more loops from the Devotion pack. Basically, all these 3 elements are just to add more groove and make it more interesting for the listener. In between the first and second part of the drop, there are just some snares and a little sweep that really sucks you into the next part of the drop. For the FX, there's not much special going on. There's a vinyl noise, but it's really turned down in volume, and some misc FX. A little uplifter when there's this transition between the first and second part of the drop. And then in the second part of the drop, there is an impact and a misc FX, which sounds like this. But that's basically it for the whole drop already. And I will now show you how you can arrange this into something that sounds more like a whole track. So as you can see, the intro part of this track is pretty similar to the drop. It just has a little less elements, and the number 1 trick for these kind of intros is to use a filter on your bass and kick, and that will sound like this. But if you turn off that filter, it will basically sound like a drop once again. So in the first part of the intro, there's this filter. And then right here it opens up, so you get bass to it. Then the build-up for this is really simple. It's just a brass loop with an impact. In this case, for this style, I just like to keep it really simple. You don't need to add that much elements. There's an automation on the master volume as well, which is turned down a little bit towards the drop, because then your buildup will sound less loud and your drop will hit much harder. It's a trick that you can use in any style. And that's basically it for this project. I will now show you guys the project once again. It's pretty simple. I think the most important part is the brass loop, which you can make by yourself or use one from a pack. You can also get some really realistic ones, like that are really recorded by some kind of saxophone player or someone who plays a trumpet. You can find that on Splice as well. So you can play around with that a little bit, but you can also use Contact, as I showed you guys, to make them yourself. So I will now show you guys once again what it sounds like. I hope you guys like this tutorial. If you want to check out this project yourself, it's also included in the full Devotion bundle, as well as samples, presets, vocals and much more. The link for that is in the description. If you have any questions, drop them down below and we will try to get back to you as soon as possible. If you don't want to miss out on daily produced content, also make sure to follow us on Instagram, which is @theproducerschool, and we post a lot of cool stuff there as well, such as tips, tricks, reels and much more. For now, I want to thank you guys for watching and I see you guys in the next video.